This is Judy Gelman Myers with New Jewish Cinema for Shalom TV. I'm here with Diane Kurys, and we're talking about her wonderful new film, For a Woman.
Quand les parents disparaissent, ils ne nous laissent que quelques vieilles photos et des questions sans réponse. On grandit sans savoir. J'ai imaginé mes parents ensemble, au temps où ils s'aimaient. Alors j'ai ouvert la valise de ma mère, la valise des secrets. Il ne me restait plus qu'à les faire revivre.
On est français!
Michel, il y a un type qui a sonné, il me dit qu'il est ton frère.
C'est pas possible, il est mort dans les camps.
Il arrive de Moscou.
Je pensais que t'étais mort. Moi aussi, je pensais que t'étais mort.
T'es sûr que c'est ton frère?
Il y en a qui pensent que c'est une taupe. Et toi, qu'est-ce que tu penses?
Ça vous ferait que le communiste ait démissionné?
Elle est belle, Léna. La première fois que je l'ai vue, j'ai su que c'était la femme de ma vie.
Et elle a pensé que t'étais l'homme de sa vie.
Puis quand tu fais tout ce qu'il te dit.
Ouais, toi, tu fais pas tout ce qu'il te dit.
Et lui, vous le connaissez pas non plus?
Qu'est-ce qui
Ne
se passe?
retourne pas, continue à marcher.
Déserteur, espion, c'est quoi la vérité?
C'est pourquoi ils sont morts, nos parents? Parce que des types comme toi ont oublié aux ordres. Voilà pourquoi ils sont morts.
Je veux pas coucher avec la femme de mon frère.
Et des bêtises qu'on regrette de pas avoir faites.
Irène.
C'est ton frère.
Ça, mon frère?
On grandit tant bien que mal, entre les non-dits et les questions sans réponse. Et puis un jour, on regarde enfin ses parents comme un homme et une femme qu'on aurait croisés dans nos vies et qu'on aurait aimés simplement pour ce qu'ils étaient.
Diane, it's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to be here too. Thank you.
In your own words, do you want to describe a little bit what the film is about?
The film is, it's very difficult for me to pitch the film, as they say, because it exists now. It's not a project, it's a film.
Right.
It's a story about my parents after the war. When I was young, I was always told that I had an uncle who was coming from the Red Army and who arrived in Lyon, where my parents lived. They were survivors from the Holocaust. And in 1947, he arrived in Lyon and stayed with them for a year. And then after that, there was a fight between the two brothers. Not a physical fight, but a definitive fight. And I always knew that story. And one day, later on in life, when I was already a filmmaker and I had already talked about my past and my parents and how they met in a concentration camp in France, I suddenly realized that maybe that uncle who was there before my birth had maybe an affair with my mother, and then from then on I imagined that maybe I was his daughter. So that was the premise. That was the premises of the film, and the story tells the story about this woman torn between these two men, these two brothers, basically. And it's the filmmaker I am, who incarnated by an actress, Sylvie Testu, in the film, who is trying to understand and where does she come from, who were her parents when she was not born, and how it's a way of, for me, of putting them back together again, because they separated when I was very young.
Yeah. So For a Woman is a really lush, very lush, gorgeous period drama based on autobiographical material. As a Jew growing up in post-Vichy France, did you feel different?
It's funny because in France, they never say post-Vichy France. They always say post-war, post-whatever, but they never mention the name.
Yeah, well.
Vichy. Very interesting. Well, I was raised with no religion in my family. My father was a real communist, and religion for him was not the right choice. And my mother didn't have a religious background, really. So they were both Jews and aware of it. But the tradition was somehow lost in my background, and my father used to say, "I'm a Jew as long as there will be anti-Semitism in the world." So that was his definition, and it sort of influenced me, and I couldn't possibly position myself as a Jew in France making movies as much as I'm a woman in France making movies, or I'm a short person or not very tall in France making movies. So my films are not really defined by my origin, but it's true that very often I put little stones somewhere and notes and marks to just remember, or to just, I touched the story, the film that was really well known here because it went to the Academy Awards, and it was Entre Nous, that movie which was telling the story about these two people meeting in a camp run by French police. And that's how my parents met. So of course I touched the subject matter, the Holocaust, Israel. I'm very often it's there. In this new particular movie, I'm talking about what they used to call themselves the Avengers, the people who came out of the camps, these young, I would say crazy, but they were not crazy. They were coming out of hell. And they wanted a revenge, an immediate revenge. And they had planned, in fact, and I realized this reading a book about them, very, very few literature about them, that they had planned to kill 6 million Germans after the war, and they wanted to do that. So they poisoned the water in 6 different cities in Germany. They poisoned the bread in the Nuremberg prison. They didn't want to let them get away with the crime. And for 3 years, these young people coming out of the Holocaust fought the way they could, killed as many Nazis as they could. And then in 1947, Ben-Gurion at the time, who was not yet the president, prime minister, sent messages and said, you've got to stop. This is a very bad image for our people. You cannot do that. You cannot be criminals. You cannot kill. We've been killed, but you cannot respond the same way. Justice should prevail. And they stopped, and they disappeared, and they probably went to Palestine at the time, becoming Israel. But I was really fascinated by this, by the anger, the impossibility for them to forgive.
And this was your uncle?
My uncle was a member of these people at some point in his life, and I just used the book I read, and I thought, oh, maybe he would. And I made up a little, thing. He doesn't have a street in Tel Aviv, but to make it clear that he went to Israel afterwards, I had to invent that some kind of a hero. It was like I based it on the people like who did that,
Yeah, but as a child, what was it like for you being Jewish in that kind of atmosphere?
As a child, we were very few Jewish people in my class, very few Jewish girls in my class, but as much as we were very few girls from separated families as well. So I had two burdens to carry. The fact that my parents had divorced, and that was very rare at the time, pretty rare in the 60s, and that I was a Jew. So both problems for France, because France has a long history of anti-Semitism. And I remember a teacher at school who would misspell on purpose Dreyfus for Levi, right? She would.
It's a pretty big spelling error.
Pretty big spelling error, and she was horrible. She was just like a lot of French, deep down in their genes somewhere is imprinted something against you.
And she became a model for the teacher in Peppermint Soda.
The bad teacher, the painting teacher. In fact, she was a sewing teacher. We learned at the time how to sew.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
And she was horrible. She was just a monster.
Wow. Your parents met in Drancy?
No, they met in Rivesaltes, which was a camp built by at the time of the Spanish Revolution, and they kept it for the Jews, foreign Jews first, and then the French Jews, to send them directly to Auschwitz. The train would go directly from Rivesaltes to there, and that's how they met. My mother had just arrived, and my father, because he was in the Foreign Legion, was recognized by his commander or chief, and he said, "What are you doing here, Kurys?" He said, "I'm a Jew. I'm going to be deported." And the guy saved him. Said, "You're not going to be deported. You're a French soldier. You fought for the French army, which was the case, and you're not to be deported." And then my father said, "Can I take my my fiancé with me, and the guy said, "You have a fiancé?" And he had seen my mother just the day before, the night before, and he had noticed that she was pretty, and he went to her and said, "Do you want to go out of here?" And she said, "Yes, by all means." He said, "Well, we've got to be married," and that's how they married.
What an incredible story.
Yeah. So I'm the product of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So how can I not be influenced by the Jewish question?
Yeah, absolutely. The Communist Party played a big part in the film. Did it also play a big part in
my father's life?
In your father's life. How and what do you remember as a child?
My father was as at the time there were a lot of communists, certainly in France, in Europe. There were probably half of them that were probably more anti-Nazi than pro-communist. But in France it was the biggest party. It was 25% of the population voted communists.
Wow.
In 1947. It's the peak of the evolution of the Communist Party in France. Then it falls until the end. Now it's almost, not even 3% or 5%. People realize. But at the time they were still completely obsessed by Stalin and sending gifts for his birthday and copying really that regime. And my father was an idealist. At the time it was very normal, very common. And at the time, I would have been a communist, I think, at the time,
Well, they didn't know.
They didn't know. And so the encounter of the two brothers, one knows and one imagines, one doesn't want to know. Right. And the encounter is violent because not only they're in love with the same woman, but there's these two opposite sides. And if you would talk with somebody who was a member of the Communist Party at the time, there was no discussion. There was no possible discussion. There was evil and there was bad and there was good, and they were on the good side. And it was impossible to talk with my father on that level. And until the very end, he remained a fervent, a deep believer in this system.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. He didn't like Israel. He didn't want. He was really like like the way they were. Didn't understand.
How old were they when they left Russia? Do you know?
He was young when he left. He left Russia for Poland when he was 5. My mother left Russia when she was 6, and she was raised in Belgium.
So neither one of them really knew the Soviet.
No, not the Soviet regime. But my father became a communist in Poland when it was not communist at all. He was in prison because of his belonging to the Communist Party in Warsaw, in Poland. And he was expelled, and he had to run away from Warsaw to arrive in France. And he arrived probably in 1927 or something like that, in France, early on. Spent 10 years, and when the war happened, he registered and went to the Foreign Legion to fight against Germany.
Wow. And they told you bedtime stories. Can you talk about the bedtime stories that they would tell you?
Well, that's my characteristic as a Jewish girl growing up in France, born from parents who really had to survive and were hidden and were like every time on the verge of being caught. I mean, and the numerous stories they told me, how we escaped from the roof. We went on the rooftop and then we climbed down, and the Nazis were after us. And they were not invented stories; they were real stories. And that was my sister and I, our bedtime stories. We loved to imagine our parents as heroes, and because they were alive, they made it. And compared to all, it's not like we're heroes and the other didn't. It's they were like
super people.
Super people, yeah, right. And that's my bedtime stories, yeah. And the anger against Germany, and I said Germany on purpose. I never went to Germany.
Yeah, no.
Bizarrely, yeah.
No. I was there for half a day,
feeling bad,
and I felt terrible. I couldn't wait to get out.
Yeah, and it's imprinted in my memory. So yeah, they would, and again, they would tell me the truth. They would tell me how, my father being in France as a ex-soldier, because there was no more army, so they sent them to Marseille, and they said, well, go wherever you want, but he was a foreigner. Still, he was in the French army, and he went to register himself when the government in November 1942 said, okay, all the Jews now, the French or foreign, have to go and register and say, I am a Jew. He went, And I kept saying, why did you go?
Why did he go?
I don't. Well, he said 3 reasons. First, it was the law. So you obey the law. You're in the country, you obey the law. You never know what's going to happen. Second of all, I was proud. I was not ashamed of being a Jew. So there was some kind of a pride in going there. I'm a Jew, yes, I'm going to say it. And third, I never imagined that it was happening, that what was happening, ever.
Right.
42. So probably in 43 he heard more because he was kept in that camp for a few weeks,
right.
knowing that he wouldn't come back.
Right.
So, but now that I read a lot and I read about what was happening in the American press at the time, how America rejected all the Jews coming, the boats, children went back to Hamburg, coming in the war. When I read all that, there was an incredible film called America and the Holocaust, Deceit and Contempt. You have never seen that movie? I saw that movie in DVD. It's just, it's how Roosevelt changed the law every time so people couldn't get out of France. The visa problem was, now you have to have that, next week you have to have another paper, and they were playing with all the consulate in Europe. So people would queue online and wait and hope. And I read all this. I read all these letters, desperate letters. There's a correspondence of Einstein with a young scientist who wants to leave Germany, who cannot. And Einstein tries to help him. And in the end, the last letter, I think it's 7 or 8, 10 letters, the last letter, you understand that he's not going to make it. I mean, I read all this to just understand. So I know what they went through. And I mean, I don't know because I wasn't there, but I was. Yeah, it's imprinted in me. I went to Israel for 1 year. I went to a kibbutz when I was 17.
Yeah,
thinking I would live there forever.
You like working with autobiographical material. Many of your films have used your own life as subject, either indirectly or indirectly. Can you tell me why you like working with autobiographical material?
I think most artists do that. I just say it out loud, that's all. I just don't hide myself. I mean, painters paint their wives, and children, and even if you adapt some book, you put yourself into it. And every creation, in a way, every vision has its own autobiographical background. Mine is more evident, because I talk about a teenager growing up in the 60s in Pepper and Soda, and of course, yes, I base it on my own experience and memories, and then you make a film, then you invent, then you create. As I told you before, for a woman is a story that I made up. I invented it because I wasn't born, and nobody told me the story ever. So I had to recreate it. I had to imagine what it was to be 25, my mother, after the war, after the chaos of, she was an orphan, she had lost her mother, she had lost the whole of family, she had no family, no background, just this man who chose her. And I put myself in her shoes and in her position. How did she feel when this brother, younger, came to the flat? And she was already a little bored with that older man who was working hard for her to make her happy. And in the 50s, at that time when it's forbidden, but yet the desires that she was young, she had only one lover in her life, my father, And it's a way of just trying to put a mirror in front. You put a mirror in front of you or your family, or your siblings, and then you turn it over for the audience. And if they connect, if they see themselves or something that they went through, that's what everybody who creates at some point of his life is longing for, a connection. So I long for connections when I read a book. So I recognize something that I feel like, oh my God, I never thought about that, but yes, it rings something deep, true. That's what we do. Actors do that also. They go deep, to dig sometimes, and it's painful sometimes, and sometimes it's pleasant, to bring us gems from somewhere, from their subconscious or from their memory. They use themselves as much as we do, writers, and then they send it to the audience eventually. So that's why the autobiographical for me is almost like a joke, because yes, it is autobiographical. I don't know anything about my parents, in fact. And that story, au fond, in fact, is completely made up. Because, you know, it probably didn't happen.
Can you talk about your year in Israel, that you were on the kibbutz?
I spent a year in the kibbutz in Yechiam, in Galil. And we were a whole group of, we were 15 French people. We arrived in a kibbutz which was created by Hungarians. And the Hungarians are not very smiling. And there was another group, another Hungarian, which was coming from South America. And they were very funny. And the Hungarians loved the South Americans better than us, the French.
Interesting.
For some reason. We were like sort of put on the side. But I worked my whole year, 6 months picking up oranges and grapefruits and lemon, and then tobacco. And I worked at the fields, and I learned Hebrew, and I did my baccalaureate at the same time, because I had promised my mother I would do that. I was 17. I had left school, so I took my exam at the Lycée Français in Tel Aviv, and then the day of the exam, it was June 6th, and June 6th is always the day of the exam in France for the baccalaureate, but it was the first day of the 6 Days War. Wow. And so it was canceled for a month, and I thought, oh my God, not only there's a war, but I can't have my exam. So then I had my exam, and the war was only 6 days long. So I was able to, when I came back, to be a teacher for a few months in Paris to make a living before I became an actress.
What was the feeling like?
Feeling was horrible.
Really? In Israel after the 6 Day War?
During.
Right.
During. Horrible, yeah. Because, you know, our friends were in the army already, because they had arrived 6 months before, and I say us, I was with my boyfriend, and we arrived 6 months later, so they already spoke enough Hebrew so they could be sent to the army. And we didn't go to the army because we were just arriving. So we stayed in the kibbutz with the children, the old people, and the women who couldn't go to the war, with a fear in our bellies everywhere, because it was my first war, and it was a war, and you don't know how long it takes a war. I mean, now we know, but when it started, we would listen to a radio Le Caire in French, or radio Amman in French, and they would, the usual, Tel Aviv is in flame, we're burning all the cities, no more Jews tomorrow, and we were like in the dark in our little rooms, thinking we're not going to see our friends, we're not going to see our parents, we're going to die here. Wow. This was the feeling, yeah, this was my feeling at least. And I wrote letters that I never sent at the time to my family, which were like, you know, why do I die here, you know? Because it was really, I mean, all the armies around, when we were surrounded, I was living 6 kilometers from the Lebanese frontier and 12 from the Syrian frontier. So, you know, the north of Israel is like, so I saw the MiGs, I saw the planes, I mean, and you don't know. And all of a sudden they said, it's over. You said, it's over? You prepare yourself for months of war. I can't leave the country, I've got to stay here, no way to get out. And now I have to just be, you know, maybe to die at war. Difficult choice, difficult position. And then we took a trip, after the war we took a trip, the members of the kibbutz took a trip to the occupied territory, and that was also pretty tough, painful, because it was the first time they would go to Jerusalem East and to the East Jerusalem and to Jordania, to Cisjordania, and we would cross in our little bus towns that had been deserted, you know.
Right.
It was tough. I mean, you could smell the war, you could smell the fear, you could smell the...
Did you feel the jubilation when the war was over?
No jubilation at all. Our kibbutz was a very leftist kibbutz.
Was it a Hashomer kibbutz
yes,
by any chance?
Yes.
I was in Hashomer.
Right. So it was a Hashomer kibbutz, and we were not at all happy. And we were like the people at the time, politicians saying, we have to give back these territories. It's going to be a nightmare if we keep them. That was the policy, and it was so true, I think. This is my belief. Well, that's what Ben-Gurion said later on. I mean, we should have given these territories, at least these ones. Anyway, and because it started from there, the camps on both sides. Nobody wanted these Palestinians. You know, they were like what, 300,000, 400,000. That's it.
Right.
how many are they now?
Do you think you got involved in Hashemir because of your parents' Russian background?
Probably, yeah. Well, I was 15, I wanted friends, you know, and it was a great group of people doing things, dreaming of something else. And the idea of Israel was not my first idea, just I wanted to have fun. And the kibbutz was more my idea. You know, togetherness, sharing everything, no money, that sort of idealistic life was more the goal than anything else. And to stay with my friends,
yeah,
you know, because I was young and it was just funny and great. It's a great experience. I don't regret it at all. And I know the country now well, and I learned Hebrew a little bit. So although I forgot a lot, but I forgot my Russian when I learned Hebrew. Actually, I mixed the two languages. Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
One more question: can you talk about having Coppola on the set of A Man in Love and Cinecittà?
You read that?
Yeah.
He was so great. He was so great, and everybody wanted a piece of him. So he stayed for 2 or 3 days. Came to my. Exactly. He was the Godfather. I had a big house, and then he came to my house. We had a party for him, and then at the party, I remember I have pictures with him. I remember everybody coming to him to ask advice, and he gave me a piece of advice at the time because we were filming in film at the time, and it was costing a lot of money if you would print a lot of prints, a lot of scenes. And he said, "Piece of advice for you: print only one take because you know." When you're on the set, you know which one is the good one. Don't print the others. And I started to do that, and he was right. He was right. It was very, very clever. Because you know, when you saw what you were expecting from an actor, you know it's there or not.
Right.
As long as it's not there, you carry on. But if it's there, just end it. Don't ask him to make another one.
Yeah. It also probably makes editing a lot easier.
It makes editing a lot easier. You have no choice. You have one print.
Right. Right.
But now with digital, it changes because you can print everything you want.
Yeah, is that what you're doing, or are you still working the same way?
No, I'm still working with the same idea. No, it helped me. It's true. It's true. You're more. You know that when you go through the experience of filming, everything that is happening there, and the more I go, the more I learn that. That's what matters, the moment. That you know, because that's what you. And if you don't have it. Carry on. Don't give up until you have it, what you want.
Ah, that's great. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
This has been Judy Gelman for Shalom TV and New Jewish Cinema with Diane Kurys, talking about her very, very beautiful film, For a Woman. Thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.